Pocahontas' story was not a love story. Forget what you saw in the Disney movie. The real Pocahontas was kidnapped by the English as a 15-year-old, kept in a prison, raped multiple times by multiple men over the course of a year, impregnated by one of them, and then that baby was used to blackmail Pocahontas' family, and Pocahontas was kidnapped to England and killed.
What?
Yeah, and Disney then heard the story and they were like, hey, that's a good foundation for a kids movie, let's do it. How come that somehow this dark story of abuse of a Native American woman turned into one of history's more famous love stories? Well, because one of the rapists who first had his eye on Pocahontas when she was 10 and he was 27, that man was known as John Smith, and he decided to write a fictional love story about him and Pocahontas back in 1624. And it became a bestseller, and that's how we got the Pocahontas we now know. And now you already have, a TikTok version of this video, which I like to call headline information. Now let's actually go deeper. And it all started
in the beginning, in the beginning.
in 1607. Europeans at the time had a massive hard-on for what they then called the New World and we today call dumbass Christopher Columbus thought he was the first to discover it in 1492. He wasn't. The Vikings got there a solid 471 years earlier. And Columbus also thought it was South Asia, and so they called the natives of America Indians and decided they were not real people, and them living here already doesn't count as civilization, so they claimed they discovered a new world and the natives were basically considered animals or savages at best. Over the next century, the English also made their way there, and in May of 1607, John Smith and a bunch of English people entered this new world and established a settlement that they called Jamestown, in what was already the territory of the native Powhatan people, not to be confused with Powhatan. The Powhatan people consisted of about 15,000 men and women and further divided into 30 tribes. So when these Powhatan ran into the English hunting party, they were like, the English were quite literally aliens to them, so a fight broke out between the natives and the English, during which John Smith was captured and sentenced to die by having his head smashed with a rock. But then, a 10-year-old Pocahontas stepped in and saved him, saying they would have to kill her first if they want to kill this heroic white man that is a complete stranger to her. Yeah, that's absolute BS. Obviously, absolute BS that John Smith wanted us to believe.
Why you always lying?
This absolute and utter lie of a story he later wrote down in his book, and that all of Europe chose to believe. Brave John Smith, attacked by savages who wanted to brutally kill him, but his English charm bewitches an innocent 10-year-old who sees the innocent and God-fearing man in him and is willing to give her life for his. The truth is that the Powhatan didn't even allow kids at their adult ceremonies, so there's that. And John Smith was not sentenced to be ceremonially executed, but actually ceremonially welcomed. After the Powhatan encountered the English, they decided to show the group's leader, John Smith, their ways. They showed John around their 30 villages and performed an honorable initiation ceremony for him to welcome him to their lands. Then, after he was initiated peacefully, John Smith met the Powhatan chief's daughter, 10-year-old Pocahontas. Note that I'm not talking about one of the 30 tribal chiefs, I'm talking about the Powhatan chief, the Don Dada himself, chief of all the Powhatan, whose name was Wahun Senaka. Wahun Senaka had a bunch of children because it was a custom that he sleeps with the most beautiful and intelligent woman of each tribe once she becomes of age until she gives him a baby. And only when the chief is done with her, she can go and get married and start her own family. The natives, they didn't consider this sloppy seconds or anything. It was a way to keep the royal bloodline strong, and these children were also given special training to become future leaders in various functions. So it was a system that worked for them. And one of these children was this particular 10-year-old girl whose name was not Pocahontas yet, but who at the time was named Amonute, but the people of her tribe generally called her Matoaka, which translates to a flower between two streams, as it was custom to first give a child a name that describes some circumstance of its birth, while the person's actual later name is given later in life based on the person's personality. So, Matoaka was the daughter of Wahunsenaka, the Dawn Dara chief of the Powhatan, and her mother was obviously one of the women he chose to breed with. And her mother, that woman's name was actually Pocahontas, and the chief was said to have liked her a bit more than the others because she was
fine with a capital fine.
But unfortunately, this Pocahontas, the mother, died during childbirth, and I'm just realizing that's a hell of a backstory before I finally get back to John Smith, freshly initiated, catching a glimpse of Matoaka. And when he was told she is the chief's daughter, he took a mental note of that. Now super knowledgeable in the ways of the natives, John Smith returns to Jamestown and decides to write a book about his unique experience and change all the facts for lies, turn the Powhatan into brutal savages, turn the chief's 10-year-old daughter into a beautiful princess that along with 30 other of these savage beauties danced around him, begging him to lay the pipe down on all of them. It's super weird, it's super creepy, and so it became a bestseller and served as the perfect inspiration for a Disney movie 390 years later.
If you kill him, you'll have to kill me too. I love him, Father.
But yeah, later. That would come later. For now, John Smith and the settlers in Jamestown, they had other problems. They were kind of starving. It turns out that the English were not so good at hunting in this new world of theirs, but conveniently, this new world had been the only world to the natives for a while, and they were really good at hunting here. So the Powhatan decided to help their new foreign neighbors by supplying them with food and helping them with their harvests. These absolute savages.
Can you believe that?
But even the Powhatan were not above the whims of nature, and eventually a particularly rough harvest saw everybody suffering through a bit of starving. But hey, they're all friends now, right? So if they just minimize their consumption and help each other. Yeah, no, the English decided to attack the Powhatan people with their superior weapons, aka guns, and at gunpoint, John Smith and the gang forced the natives to hand over their food and supplies. Better the savages starved than the good Christian Europeans. Duh, we're not all God's children. So after experiencing a bit of that famous Christian hospitality, Chief Powhatan decided to move his people further away from Jamestown, which unfortunately also left some of the fringe villages further away from the chief and his protection. Eventually though, the rough season passed, some years passed, and we find ourselves in the summer of 1613. Formerly 10-year-old Matoaka is now 15-year-old Pocahontas. Her father gave her that name because she reminded him so much of her late mother. And as the chief's daughter, Pocahontas obviously did not have to breed with him when she became of age. She was free to marry a man of her choice. And that man was a warrior from the Patawomek clan, Kokum. Kokum and his clan lived a lot closer to Jamestown, and Pocahontas moved in with him and his people in their village. She got pregnant, they were in love, and in anticipation of their family, they lived a happy life, which in the summer meant running around naked to deal with the heat better. This was common amongst natives. They didn't have the same concepts and hang-ups around bodies as we do now, but the Europeans, they did have the same concepts and hang-ups around bodies as we do now. So to them, there was just a bunch of naked women running around constantly, and since the English settlement was a major sausage party, the English were like,
I need some sex! Man, I'm so horny.
And caution, this is where this whole video takes a really dark turn for the rest of the video. For these Englishmen, it sure was convenient that these people, these women, they were savages, remember? They did not consider these Powhatan humans, not really, but they sure had some nice looking human female bodies, so who cares if you raped them? If anything, these good Christians were doing these savages a favor by coupling with them. They don't have a bit of Christian in them right now, but with a bit of rape, they just might. And that would give these savages more humanity than they deserved anyway. So from then on, the English freely raped the Powhatan women, And remember that a Powhatan in this time was considered a woman from the age of 14. So everyone above that age, and to be honest, probably a lot of children below that age, were considered fair and literal hunting game for the English to rape. Needless to say, once the Powhatan heard that the English were raping all their women, they weren't too happy about that. See, unlike the English actual savages, the natives punished a rapist with the death sentence. So as far as the Powhatan were concerned, the English had just doomed themselves, and sentencing them to death was fair and justified. This was a problem for the colonizers because Jamestown had just barely avoided starving, and while they could hold a village or two at gunpoint to rob them, the might of the entire Powhatan, that was an impossible battle. The natives outnumbered them 15,000 to about 100 English. War against the Powhatan, while starving, it would wipe the English off the face of this new world. So they needed a solution. Enter John Smith, who, thanks to the natives' hospitality, knew that this Pocahontas girl living in a nearby village was actually the chief's daughter because he met her when she was 10, remember? So he knew that the chief named her Pocahontas after her late mother. He knew the chief really cared for this daughter of his. So the plan was simple. Kidnap 15-year-old Pocahontas and threaten to kill her unless the Powhatan called off the attack and supply the English with food. So the English did that. They kidnapped Pocahontas while she was with the village's midwives and recovering from just giving birth to her first child. They kidnapped her and then they killed her husband, Kokum, to make their newborn baby an orphan, and took Pocahontas to a ship where they held the teenage girl prisoner in a cell below deck. And while negotiations were going on with the Powhatan and tempers flared and skirmishes arose and were resolved over the course of the next month, Pocahontas was repeatedly raped by her captors. The Englishmen took turns on the teenage girl, and eventually one of them got Pocahontas pregnant. That was another problem, because it's hard to bargain against someone when there is proof that you abused your bargaining chip. Pocahontas' safety was the chief's main request and concern, and well, that was out the window now. Again, the English needed a solution. But John Smith wasn't around anymore to bail them out. This guy had been smoking a pipe near gunpowder and accidentally blew himself up enough that he needed to be sent back to England for treatment. But there was a new John in town. John Rolfe, a 40-something-year-old wealthy owner of a tobacco farm in these lands who was shipping tobacco back and forth to England. And John Rolfe, he knew just how to resolve this matter. One of Pocahontas' many rapists himself, he said he would marry Pocahontas, claim the child as his own, claim it was a child conceived in love, and he would use his tobacco to bribe the smoke-happy spiritual leaders of the Powhatan so that they can confirm this love story between John Rolfe and young Pocahontas to the chief. But because John Rolfe couldn't just marry a savage, they had to make Pocahontas human first by baptizing her. So Pocahontas was forced to convert to Christianity and given the name Rebecca. I will continue to call her Pocahontas throughout this video because I feel it's the respectful thing to do. Then Pocahontas was wed to John Rolfe. The spiritual Powhatan leaders got their tobacco and reported back to the chief, who hadn't seen his daughter in almost a year, reported back to him that Pocahontas was good and well, happy, in love, pregnant, and that she wished to sail back to England with her new husband to raise their child and start a family. The chief had no reason to doubt this story, and with his daughter married to an Englishman, pregnant with a half-English child, the crimes of the past were forgotten. He called off the hostilities and gave the English his blessing to take Pocahontas to England. Once in England, 19-year-old Pocahontas became an icon. Against her will, mind you, but still, she was an icon. She was a sensation. Here was the savage girl that had somehow learned the ways of the English, mastered the English language more and more with every passing day, dressed like an English woman, did her hair and makeup like an English lady. It fascinated the country, especially since Pocahontas was also the main character of one of the best-selling novels in England, The Tale of John Smith and Pocahontas. Remember, John Smith Our noble, cowardly liar? Yeah, after he blew himself up smoking a pipe and received treatment in England, he finished his supposed non-fiction, but definitely all fiction, novel. And amongst all the lies he told in it, Pocahontas, she was real. She was just not the girl who saved him, nor was she the girl who desired him. But the English didn't know that, and it didn't matter, because what matters is that Pocahontas was actually real. Like, what? And now she was in England? A character from a best-selling novel was real and in this country? Again, what? This is crazy. How can a character come to life? It was insane. And the fact that she was this really well-mannered savage on top of that? Unbelievable. Pocahontas had since also given birth to the son one of the rapists put in her belly, and since she had been forced to marry John Rolfe, her son was born as Thomas Rolfe. And to the outside world, Pocahontas was a happy mother, happy wife. You'd never know her pain because she kept it all hidden under the makeup, under the hairdo, under the dresses, all the English customs she adopted to enhance her already natural beauty. And in that way, Pocahontas smiled her way to absolute celebrity until she became so famous that even King James and Queen Anne wanted to meet her. And when she met the English royalty, they were delighted by her manners and her fluent English. In fact, if Pocahontas was like this, maybe her people weren't the savages the English thought they were. And of course, that was Pocahontas' plan all along. She knew that with every reciprocated smile and every person of status she won over, little by little, she could change the perception of natives and possibly change the way her people are and will be treated by the colonizers. Spoiler alert, it didn't change anything. Native Americans continued to have their lands stolen from them and to this day continue to suffer and face discrimination in their own country, becoming victims of violent crimes at a disproportionate rate to the rest of the population. That's a fact. But hey, how could Pocahontas know that at the time? This girl had been through hell and just tried to make sure others don't suffer her fate. So she kind of built herself up as a socialite, and before long, her and John Rolfe were invited to all the big events, and with her fame and her speaking fluent English by now, all of that, this was starting to become a bit of a problem because Pocahontas had a voice now, a platform. What if she tells the truth about what happened to her? What if she reveals all the crimes the colonizers had committed in the New World? It was too dangerous, especially since John Rolfe had since built himself quite the tobacco empire between England and that New World. In fact, part of the reason he was parading Pocahontas around was to show the people the appeal of this new world. Him and the people of Jamestown secured investments for this mysterious new land that is home to beauties such as Pocahontas and where such fairy tale love stories can come true. Pocahontas had become the poster child of a fantasy. There were paintings of her, stories written about her, and souvenirs sold with her likeness. The colonizers and their budget for conquest profited greatly from this marketing campaign. But now, Pocahontas' growing independence was a danger to all they used her image to build. So John Rolfe had to end it. And in order to shut Pocahontas up before she ever starts talking, he decided to send her back home and end this little England adventure. So in March 1617, a now just over 20 years old Pocahontas set sail to the New World to return to the Powhatan tribe and her family. And just a couple of days into the journey, she was killed on the ship without witnesses. Of course, the official story was that she fell ill with a mysterious disease that as a native she had no resistance to, but if you believe that, I got this bridge that you might be interested in buying. Come on. John Rolfe didn't even make an inch of an effort to hide the murder and sell this death as a tragedy brought on by illness. This man didn't play the grieving husband for a second. Despite having grown filthy rich off of his tobacco trade and the investments Pocahontas' stardom helped him secure, he just had her buried in an unmarked grave in a pauper burial. That means a public funeral paid for by local authority, usually for people that don't have any known family or cannot afford to pay for a funeral. Essentially, it's throwing the body in a hole and covering it up with dirt. This was John Rolfe's final FU to Pocahontas, and that is, unfortunately, how her story ended. While John Rolfe and other Europeans continued to conquer, colonize, and commit atrocities against the natives. But that's a video for another day, so let me know if you want me to cover more of these stories of that colonizing, conquering history of humanity. The sad reality is that now Pocahontas represents the fact that you can rape and murder an indigenous woman and get away with it. You tell the story well enough and you might even become a hero and get a Disney movie out of it.
Come rolling all the riches all around you, and for once never wonder what they're worth.
I don't want to crap on Disney too much, because you could also argue that it created a general awareness of Pocahontas, and many people maybe looked into her story more after the movie, but still, it's pretty disgusting how Disney chose to tell the story. Anyway, as with most of my stories on this channel, I consider myself to only be the one to introduce you to a topic or maybe summarize it. But the matter of violence and discrimination against indigenous people is very disturbing and very real, and not just in America. So if the story of Pocahontas touched you, I encourage you to look into these stories of violence against people that are forgotten and definitely do have a voice. It's just entirely not heard because they are drowned out and their suffering is barely ever reported on. And if it is, these reports focus on poverty and alcoholism rather than the murdered and missing indigenous women crisis or the lack of opportunity and protection. But hey, there's a lot of great and better research information on these things, just a Google search away. For my part, I'd be proud if this video raises some awareness and maybe sends you down that rabbit hole. But either way, thank you for watching. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with me, and I appreciate that. So, see you in the next one.